Hi, folks. It has been a really rather busy 3 or 4 days. So I was not able to do a weekly overview this week, but I'm going to combine some of those elements in this particular video. What I do want to talk about and what I'm observing in the work that I'm doing, readings, etc., is that these squares to Saturn are really being felt. So Mercury squared Saturn. Mercury entered the sign of Cancer. So let's just do it this way. Mercury and Jupiter entered the sign of Cancer between June 8th and June 9th. And just before entering Cancer, they conjuncted in Gemini. And then they both entered Cancer. And Mercury squared Saturn in Aries. Mercury in Cancer squared Saturn in Aries on June the 9th. Jupiter, and I did a video on the Jupiter square Saturn and Neptune, and I'll just place a link to that video at the end of this one. So this is basically developing some of the stuff I've talked about in the last couple of videos, but it's worth developing. You know, when I did that video, I was just like, I'm feeling compelled to, and I'm just like, I'm glad I did it. On the 15th, 3 days ago, Jupiter squared Saturn, and indeed, today, Jupiter squares Neptune. I'm a little bit less concerned about the squares to Neptune. It's the squares to Saturn that I am picking up on more and more. The Sun squares Saturn on the 22nd in 4 days' time. And then Venus, who is trailing behind these personal planets, is going to square Saturn on August the 1st. So Mercury squared Saturn on the 9th of June. Jupiter squared Saturn on the 15th of June. The Sun squares Saturn on the 22nd of June. Venus squares Saturn on August the 1st. And the personal planets are all squaring Saturn from the sign of Cancer. We are going to have a new moon in Cancer on the 26th, I believe. I will confirm that for you. But by the time we get to that new moon, the sun and the moon will already have squared the Saturn. So what I like about that new moon, because it sets up a whole month ahead of us, a whole 28 days ahead of us, is that the square to Saturn, at least for the sun and the moon, will be behind us by the time that new moon occurs. And that new moon occurs on the 25th, 3 days after the sun squares Saturn, and a few hours after the moon squares Saturn. So that happens, and the new moon occurs. Jupiter entering any sign, as I discussed in that Jupiter Saturn square Saturn Neptune video, is a transitive alignment, ending a 12-13-year cycle, starting a 12-13-year cycle in whichever sign it is transiting. And then Jupiter is not going to be back again into that sign for 12 to 13 years. So whichever sign Jupiter transits, he ends a 12-13-year cycle, starts a 12-13-year cycle, and it takes Jupiter 12 to 13 years to then come back to that sign in your chart. Okay, and every time he does, and that happens in every sign that he goes into. Okay, so Jupiter, for example, was in the sign of Gemini between May 24 and June the 8th of 25. And during that time, he ended a 12-13-year cycle, started a 12-13-year cycle in the sign of Gemini. Now, between June the 8th of 25 and June the 30th, I'm pretty sure, of 26, he's going to end a 12-13-year cycle, start a 12-13-year cycle in the house occupied by the sign of Cancer. And he is going to try to align these new beginnings to whatever you articulated or determined was a direction that you wanted to go in, a vision you set for yourself when last he went over your 9th house. But as the personal planets enter the sign of Cancer, while there's plenty to celebrate, because these personal planets are going to end up trining the North Node. Indeed, we have Mercury trining the North Node on the 21st, Mercury, in the sign of Pisces. So it's not as if the transits through the sign of Cancer are all doom laden or heavily laden. But the square day, it's a kind of a it's a sobering entry. And Saturn, wherever he is placed, I have to keep the window open. It's a sort of a 91-degree day here in Los Angeles, so you'll hear ambient noise. Saturn, wherever he is, and he is currently in the house occupied by the sign of Aries in the first couple of degrees there, demands that we take matters related to the house that he is transiting in seriously, in a disciplined manner, in a responsible manner, that we show up, that we have clean, clear intentions, a sense of appropriate duty, rigor, discipline, excellence in execution, appropriate strategic thinking, that we exercise maturity, wisdom, appropriate strategic thinking, that we respond and don't react, that no matter it is what we're dealing with, no matter how unfair it is, that we come from a place of self-mastery. And Saturn's preoccupation in whichever part of the chart that he is transiting is twofold. That number one, we learn karmic lessons. I did this, therefore this happened. I did this, therefore this happened. I did this, therefore this happened. Kind of a thing. Now, if someone is acting in a manner towards you that is problematic, immoral, nefarious, that doesn't mean that you're responsible for it. But Saturn's argument is, if you're dealing with fishy characters, how can you act in such a way that you're able to protect yourself and not make the situation worse? And very often when we are reactive, unfortunately, although sometimes it is appropriate, it can make things worse. Sometimes when we get to a reactive place, it can be a sign that something needs to end. Boundaries need to be set. And departures need to occur. Where it becomes problematic is if we don't do the departure, but we remain in a reactive space, then we get into these kind of karmic, highly volatile situations that never seem to have, that just seem to be getting worse and worse and worse and more complicated and more complicated and more complicated. Okay, I think you get it. So Saturn, excellence, discipline, duty, rigor, clean intentions, an awareness of stimulus, action, and result. Thoughtfully, maturely, wisely, strategically trying to maneuver things. And I don't want to say, I would even go as far as saying savvily, but not manipulatively, because we're talking about clean intentions. We're not talking about taking something that belongs to someone else. We're not talking about hurting or harming someone. Setting boundaries and hurting and harming someone are two different things. And some people may feel hurt or harmed if we feel like we're setting an appropriate boundary, but we can do it as calmly as possible and see where things are going to go. Or sometimes it can mean a departure or something, blah, 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 blah. But very often Saturn is about excellence and execution. And Saturn has a tendency to put our nose to the grindstone, to test us, to pile on responsibilities. So that we are forced to either determine that we might be on the wrong path and we need to change paths, or if we're on the right path, then Saturn is saying, all right, I need you to grow. I need you to start to act in this part of the chart in a more responsible manner. Now, as I discussed in the Jupiter squaring Saturn and Neptune video, Saturn is tempering, and we may have felt this, and this is what I'm trying to get to. When Neptune entered Aries, April, March, end of March, April onwards, in April and to some extent through May 20th, we may have made decisions or committed to things that did not necessarily or may not have necessarily honored our sense of self-worth completely. It may have been that we are in situations where we are actually giving more than we are getting. Or we're in situations where there are kind of Neptunian people involved, kind of foggy, kind of shady, kind of, there's something about it all that's a little bit, we may, after May the 20th, have realized that certain things that we committed to, agreed to, or took on, we should not have, or may not lead to very much, or may demand more of us, put us in a place where we are giving, where it's almost a kind of a sacrificing of our talents to a particular cause or a project. And it could be that we get something from it, but Neptunian influence is a kind of Saturn's presence since May the 20th in Aries, all the way to September the 1st, but especially right now while Saturn is still direct, is an indication of a demand from Saturn to say, I'm trying to bring you things now that are more, or open you up to the highest potential of what it is I'm trying to get you to in the part of the chart that I'm transiting. And I need you to understand the lessons around how Neptune is working in Aries, because after I leave, Saturn says in February 28, you're going to be left alone with Neptune in this part of the chart. So I need you to start to become a little discerning about how things come your way and what you're going to say yes to, and how you're going to be boundaried, and how you're going to be careful about situations that may feel a certain way or may look a certain way, but may ultimately make you wonder, why am I even doing this, or why am I involved in this? Now, in certain cases, you may have corrected a choice, but may actually be sticking to the right choice, but be dealing with certain Neptunian dynamics, smoke and mirrors, fogginess, Neptunian personalities, a certain amount of theft, deception, gaslighting, behind the scenes activity, blah, 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 something like that. So Saturn, of course, is trying to say, let's correct what needs to be corrected, but there are also some lessons that need to be processed. We may, when it comes to squares to Saturn, find ourselves challenged. And with Saturn, when we are challenged, we have got to try and get ourselves to a place of self-mastery. We've got to try and understand what the game is that someone else may be playing, if this is involved. And we've got to get ourselves to a place where sometimes Neptunian influences can cause to try to throw you off your throne, or instigate or trigger you in ways that make you react rightfully, but then you're the one who seems to come across as the person who's creating the drama, as opposed to the person who's actually creating the drama. These are things that Saturn does not reward. These are things where Saturn says, you're going to be dealing with this energy, whether you like it or not, in various guises. So figure out what your spiritual practice is to get yourself grounded so you can deal with this, because we all have to deal with energies like this. Sometimes we have to deal with it with people who we feel are closest to us. So in the part of the chart occupied by the sign of Aries, Saturn may be revealing things, giving you a reality check, partnering with Neptune, I should really say. Now, some of the partnering with Neptune could be that if you are pursuing goals in the Aries part of the chart that are Neptunian in nature, creative, artistic, inspired by the muses, that require you to be in a kind of a dream state to connect with something to create. Music especially, certain types of dance or theater or writing, imaginative work. Or if you're pursuing something spiritual or charitable or therapeutic, then Saturn could try to get you to realize those goals in a much more disciplined, concrete manner. Let's build this, let's go for this, let's make this happen, let's set up the foundation, let's come on, I'm going to try and help you. Get in action, roll up your sleeves, let's make something happen. If the Neptunian influence has meant, and this will be as relatively recent, March, April, May, has meant that you made some choices that are making you scratch your head, and ultimately, when Saturn came in on May the 20th, you started to feel, oh, I made these choices, but they're depleting me. They're taking from me more than they're giving. Then Saturn is, till September 1st, is going to be like, where are you putting, what are your priorities really? And how can you get to the highest of what is possible for you here? And Saturn is not interested in setting a goal that you cannot meet. But Saturn is also not interested in setting a goal that you can meet easily. So it's the right kind of stretch. It's your fullest potential. As the personal planets come through into Cancer, what happens immediately is that they are checked by Saturn. And Saturn says, you've got to pay your respects to me first and what I'm trying to do here. And I'm going to challenge you. And with Saturn, this can often take the form of someone or someone's who are calculating or cold or kind of strategic or kind of manipulative thinkers themselves, or Mercury squared Saturn on June the 9th. So it's possible that as you headed towards June the 9th, the challenge had a communication nature to it. Chatter, talk, gossip, emails, verbal conversations. Jupiter squared Saturn on the 15th. And there's something, as I said, really nice about heading to a new moon in Cancer on the 25th of June, where these squares, for the most part, will be behind us. Something about this energy is going to come back up again as you head towards August the 1st. But communications have been tested. What you need to do, the endings and new beginnings that you need to create in the Cancer part of the chart, need to be cognizant of, need to take into account what Saturn is trying to do and construct for you in the Aries part of the chart. And because I've done a separate video on that, I'm going to put a link to that video at the end of this. What I'm more interested here is getting you in tune with this energy. Now, as we head to the 22nd, with the Sun squaring Saturn, remember, with the Sun is our awareness. There's no other word for it. The solar energy just kind of shines, it's a spotlight. You know how some people say, what is the difference between anxiety and intuition? Well, with the Sun, it's intuition. And with intuition, I find that it's a very quiet thing. It's like a pebble that drops into water, and there's not much, it's just like, oh. It's not noisy. That's as far as I will go. I mean, I'm sure we can all talk about intuition versus anxiety. With the Sun squaring Saturn, let me also just say that when we follow our intuition, it is typically leading to something constructive, whereas when we follow our anxiety, it tends to just make things worse. And I think a lot of us are old enough to know when we've done both. With the Sun squaring Saturn, whatever happened from the beginning of June, as we headed towards June the 9th, and as we've headed towards June the 15th, a kind of a sense of, I can't move forward without taking this energy into account. I can't move towards creating the endings and new beginnings in the Cancer part of the chart, in the house occupied by Cancer, without understanding what it is that Saturn is trying to construct in the sign of Aries, in the house occupied by Aries, till September the 1st of this year, and then from the middle of February of 26 to the middle of February of 28. Very important, ultimately very constructive energies, but it's a challenge because Saturn figures out where we're weak and says, I'm going to help you strengthen this muscle, and we're going to work out in intervals. And we're like, I don't want to work out in intervals. I want everything to flow. With the Sun squaring Saturn on the 22nd, I want you to be very, very aware over the next few days of what your intuition and your awareness is telling you about a particular situation that is challenging you. And how you can get to a place where someone who may be trying to throw you off your throne or balance, what you need to do to not let them do that. And very often with Saturn, it can be preparation. It can be making sure that your demeanor and behavior is always centered, grounded, and professional. If that applies. Certainly centered, grounded, responsible. It's like knowing what's going on, but also knowing that if you get into a place where you're not going to be effective, you may be right but not effective, that the other person will declare victory. Or a situation will. So let's say that you're dealing with a situation where something needs to be cleaned up or addressed, or there's a deadline that needs to be met. Then what do I need to do in order to just step up to the plate and take care of this, as inconvenient as it might be? What's the responsible thing for me to do? Let's say that something needs to be done in order to help Saturn help you meet your fullest potential in the house occupied by Aries. And you're just starting to get in the flow of what happened 12 to 13 years ago when Jupiter went over the sign of Cancer last, the house occupied by Cancer. It's starting to do the same thing as of June 8th, 9th. What is on the agenda for the next 12, 13 months in the house occupied by Cancer? And as I prepare for that, Saturn says, this is what we're trying to build. This is what we're trying to do. So act accordingly. Create the appropriate endings and new beginnings. And pay attention to, in April and May, what it is that you said yes to, where you might actually be giving more. Now, it's a little tricky. Some of these things that you're giving more to might be, if they're fulfilling, then, you know, they don't have to pay you necessarily. If you're getting something out of it and it feels good and it feels right and you're enjoying it and you're loving it, great. But there may be a sense of, would I do this again? Do I need to be a little bit more careful? Do I need to be a little bit more guarded? How do I need to treat myself? What are my goals? What am I trying to build? What am I trying to build in such a way that it truly honors my potential? And sometimes these answers are not quite so clear cut. You know, with Uranus going over Taurus, if there's a connection with something coming through in the Taurus part of your chart, it may be that those steps are very individual. So there's a certain amount of discernment needed. But the Sun enters the sign of Cancer in 2 days' time. And of course, the first thing he does is 2 days later, he squares Saturn. And we're already in this place of squaring Saturn. And you may be starting to get clear about what the lay of the land is. What needs to be done to get you to act responsibly? May very well be from the Cancer part of the chart to assist Saturn. To honor Saturn's request and desire, to get you to operate in a way that honors your fullest potential, because Saturn is trying to get you to grow and develop and act more strategically. As you head towards August the 1st, last couple of weeks of July, something may come up where you feel like your financial well-being and the quality of your relationships could become affected by this Saturnian figure, person, situation. There's something really nice about the Sun squaring Saturn after Mercury and Jupiter have done, and after we've kind of dealt with 2 or 3 weeks of what fresh hell is this? And now we come into a place of, oh, this is how I need to conduct myself to navigate these waters. And if it doesn't make sense to you to say, okay, well, how am I acting in the Cancer part of the chart, to just take the situation. If you've been feeling in June a sense of constriction or tension, or, as I said, it doesn't have to be a person. It could be a deadline. It could be needing to get certain things done. It could be a sense of dependency around certain things have to be in place in order for me to be able, you know, what are you feeling that needs to be mastered. How do you create your own reality? How do you act in a disciplined way? And yes, it may feel for some people that there's a lot on the to-do plate, and so there's need to think strategically and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Go through that awareness, figure out how you can act in a way that is responsible. Because as you then head towards August the 1st, the good news is that after August the 1st, these tests are going to be done for now. Now, planets square oppose Saturn multiple times during a year. There's something about this cycle that is a little bit heightened. It may carry lessons from the past, like, oh, this is back here again. I've dealt with something like this before, this kind of situation again. There could very much be an element of you feeling like, I've really got to step up my game for this, in terms of preparation, in terms of how I conduct myself. Saturn is the kind of planet, when he enters a house, it's easy to think of this in career terms, where if you've been operating as a manager, will promote you to director, but then will also try to get you to understand how it is that you need to operate as a director as opposed to a manager in order to be successful. How to delegate more effectively, manage your team more effectively, watch the goals for your entire team or department. It's a very different energy and mindset and way of operating than it is when you might be the person who's updating certain spreadsheets or taking care of this or taking care of that. You can't continue to operate the same way in the part of the chart that Saturn has entered as you were prior to that entry. You've got to step up your game. It's like the great martial arts teacher has come in and said, we are going to practice every day. And we are going to move towards mastery. And there's something about coming to it every day. Discipline, rigor. And as I've said to you before, wherever Saturn goes, if you work with Saturn's energy, he can really reward by the time he's getting ready to leave. And that's still left in the Pisces part of the chart. That's still something that's pending in the Pisces part of the chart between September the 1st and the middle of February. You all know who've been following me how much I've been talking about and how nice it is that I have not been talking about stabilizing the Pisces part of the chart. But God knows the first 4 or 5 months, it's like there couldn't be a video without me saying that. And we're going to come back to that as we head past September the 1st. In the meantime, we've got Saturn entering Aries going, oh, planets moving into the house occupied by the sign of Cancer. Don't be so quick to rush in and just think that you're going to go trine the North Node in Pisces. First, take into account what Neptune's influence in the Aries part of the chart has been without Saturn in April until May the 20th, and what it is that you may have said yes to or no to, or what Neptune's influence has been. Whether it is trying to get you to operate in arenas that are Neptune constructively or deal with Neptunian influences. And Saturn coming to this part is saying, all right, now that you know what that is, let's work on mastery so that you're not thrown by these influences and you can set boundaries and also take action responsibly. So you can counter those aspects of Neptunian behavior that are problematic or challenging. With Saturn, it often means that you have to work that much harder. With Saturn, you can become very aware of matters related to the house that Saturn is in, where you're feeling like, well, the flow is not with me. But when you apply yourself strategically, and applying yourself does not mean finding yourself going to bed at 4 o'clock and waking up at 6 o'clock on every day to manage those responsibilities. If that is happening, then Saturn is saying something's got to shift. This is not sustainable. You will fail. So what do you need to do? Do you need to reorganize your team? Do you need to delegate more effectively? What do you need to do in order to step up and meet these responsibilities? And right now, with Mercury having squared Saturn on the 9th, with Jupiter having squared Saturn on the 15th, in a certain sense, some situation or some person has kind of thrown down the gauntlet. And you have got to figure out, as you head towards the 22nd, right now, you have got to figure out what you can do to not be defeated by this situation. which means that you've got to determine what self-mastery, what could the game be, and how can you salvage, how can you protect? Because Venus is going to enter Gemini between July the 4th and the end of July. And at the end of July, she's going to enter Cancer. And the very first thing she's going to do on August the 1st is run into the square with Saturn. Because Saturn is getting ready to go retrograde, and it's going to be slower and slower and slower. So, when does Saturn go retrograde, my darlings? Let's get clear on that too. This has been a fun video to do, actually. I was like, what am I doing, and why am I doing it? Why am I feeling compelled to do it? See, sometimes it's worth it to wait for Avi to get his act together. July 13th, Saturn will go retrograde. So Saturn is very, very slow right now. And July 13th, Saturn will go retrograde in Aries. And will be in Aries till September 1st. And on August the 1st, Venus will square Saturn. Whatever you're doing now, and the way you act now that the sun is involved, could have consequences. So if you end up acting very reactively, or someone tries to throw you off your pedestal, or someone tries to affect you negatively, or a situation is becoming pressure-filled, and a situation has to be met with Saturnian responsibility, duty, rigor, clean intentions, you may become very aware right now, because the sun is involved, over the next 3 or 4 days with regard to what is actually going on and what might be the right way to handle this. Non-reactive, strategic. And doing so might mean, and keeping that line of sight and that way of behaving, working, etc., could mean that as you head towards, you have to become very, very conscious, even in the last couple of weeks of July. You have to become very, very conscious of protecting appropriate relationships, creative opportunities, financial opportunities, so that finances. With Venus, it's Venusian things, beauty, luxuries, but most tangibly, our sense of well-being, our abundance, our money, our finances, our relationships, sense of harmony. You're going to have to figure out what the right strategy is, and you're going to need to keep that operating, and it may come up again for review in the last couple of weeks of July. In certain cases, dear ones, you're going to have to figure out whether you need to get off a dead horse with Saturn. You're going to have to figure out, is this relationship coming to an end? Or is there something going on here where I'll be non-reactive, but my response is still going to have to be clear enough that I don't think that this relationship or opportunity can be salvaged. And Saturn may be saying, this is something you agreed to when I was not in Aries and just Neptune was in Aries, and I need you to release this because you've gotten what you need out of it, and we need to move on to bigger and better things that are going to serve you more effectively. And in that case, you may need to figure out, well, how am I going to do this in such a way that still ideally keeps a bridge standing, but if it looks like it's not going to be able to, then you just may have to figure out and say, I still managed to do it in a relatively graceful way, but I'm going to let that go. That's not for me, and the universe will make it clear. If something happens in such a way that you go, there's no way to salvage this, then that could be part of it. In other cases, it could be that you just realize what pressure a situation is putting on you, what the game is, so that you can act in such a way that by the time you get to the last couple of weeks of July, you feel like, oh wow, I was able to get to some kind of win-win outcome or some sort of agreement. I showed up in such a way that that for certain stakeholders, you may have to figure out in a certain situation, what are the relationships and what are the stakeholders and who are the stakeholders that you want to preserve, that you want to salvage, that you want to secure, that you want to... This is what thinking strategically is about. If you're dealing with a situation or someone in particular who's trying to push you off your throne or kind of play games, it could be that you know already, well, this relationship is never going to be, I'm never going to be able to trust this person. But the relationship that they're trying to affect, I'm going to see if I can operate in such a way that I can still build a bridge and keep that going to the best of my ability. And if I can't, it will become clear in the last 2 weeks of July, and I may have to be like, all right, thank you so much. And you may just be like, how can I let this go so that it doesn't turn into a drama that becomes occupied? Because Saturn is saying, hey, look, this is what we're going to be working on for the next 2 years. And this is how you've got to figure out what you're choosing and what you're constructing and how you're going about building appropriate bridges and committing to things and building something that is really worthy of your potential in the Aries part of the chart. So let me know in the comments if this resonates or not. Let me do my homework as I've gotten to this point. 3 ways to engage with me: the free content I put on the site, the membership part of the channel, $6.99 a month, where I put sign-specific content, primarily for rising signs, but you can watch it for your sun and moon. And then, of course, you can get a personal reading with me, and the description, the email address for where to contact me for a reading is in the description box below. And information on how to become a member is in the description box below. Other things going on this week: Mars entered the sign of Virgo on the 17th of June. And Mars is going to be in Virgo all the way to August the 6th. So pursuing goals and setting boundaries in the house occupied by Virgo now starts to take greater priority. It's exciting because as you get to August the 6th, Mars is moving towards trining Uranus, which should be nice. Jupiter squared Neptune on the 18th, as I mentioned, and that is included in that Jupiter squaring Saturn Neptune video. The Sun enters the sign of Cancer in 2 days' time. And then moves to square Saturn and Neptune on the 22nd and the 23rd. So as we head to the 22nd and 23rd, you might really become aware of what are these Saturnian, Neptunian lessons and what is actually going on here. And what is the best way for you to present yourself so that you can get a sense of what's going on, and is there something or some kind of relationship or some kind of situation that is coming to an end? Or is there something here that can be salvaged where you can act in a way where you're able to play chess with some sort of situation or person effectively? It will challenge you, and you will be challenged to be both prepared and also respond and not react. One intriguing thing happens on the 21st, which is that Mercury in Cancer trines the North Node in Pisces. So some sort of communication, word on the street, in the Cancer part of the house occupied by Cancer, that creates a certain flow towards you leaning into the Pisces part of the chart to develop something, get something. The Sun is going to form this trine. Jupiter, of course, is ultimately going to form this trine, but before that, Venus will also form this trine. So just as we are talking about these squares to Saturn, right now, just pay attention to communications in writing, speaking, texting, in the house occupied by Cancer, transactions, communications, the winged messenger, commuting, travel for some people, With Mercury, it's often something a lot more local. Just keep an eye out for, because it's not going to become clear until we get to a point where the sun is moving towards trining the north node. So for a little while right now, it's like you're paying attention because Mercury is ahead of the sun. Lines and channels of communication are going to start to flow before we are able to make sense of them. And unlike the square to Saturn, this is a more constructive aspect that is growing. There's flow here. What does leaning into the house occupied by Pisces mean to me? And remember, the very first of the sign-specific videos I did in the membership part of the channel for members was the new moon in Pisces, and I covered for each rising sign the north node eclipses in Pisces. But for anybody, what does it mean to lean into the house occupied by Pisces, where I need to get something, develop something, build something, move towards something that is essential for my own development? And what is coming up from a communication perspective in the Cancer part of my chart, house occupied by Cancer, that is creating a certain amount of flow in that direction? I'm going to leave it at that. Feel free, if you find this content useful or my channel useful, feel free to tell others about it, share the content, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Next to the subscribe button is the wiggly bell option, the bell. When you click the subscribe option, and you can click the wiggly bell on top and you'll be notified when I do new videos. You can contribute to the channel by using the thanks button underneath this video, or by donating to the channel, and the information on that is in the description box below. You can contribute to the channel for free by liking this video or leaving a comment. Thank you everyone for your patience as always. I don't know why I'm always feeling like if I had my druthers, I would just be posting all the time. Anyway, but life is life. All right, let's leave it at this for now. And hopefully this gives us all some food for thought. And feel free to let me know, share only what you're comfortable sharing, if this resonates. Okay, take care.